Today, I tell you the story of an orphan boy who seemed to be someone ordinary, or that until his grandfather, the only person he counted on, was eliminated, awakening a strange power with which he now seeks to avenge the loss of his grandfather no matter the cost. That this entails, yes, for this he will have to increase his level drastically until he finds the son of fruit. Of course, meeting several girls along his path. So if you are interested in the story of this boy, stay, make yourself comfortable, and bring the popcorn because today you bring smoke. Mokushiroku no Yonkishi. The story begins by introducing us to our protagonist, this little boy from here, Percival, who spent his days with his grandfather and who, by the way, had quite unusual abilities. Grandpa had overwhelming strength while Percival didn't either. They stayed behind, having skills that allowed them to easily hunt the giant beasts that roamed the small island where they lived and which they used as their food. On the other hand, the grandfather for several years had been giving Percival quite strict training, regularly having fights one-to-one since apparently the latter had experience on the battlefield. But well, the grandfather remembered that Percival would turn 16 the next day, with which he explained that he could finally leave the small island where they lived to explore the world and have adventures just as he and his father had once done. However, Percival calmly replied that he was not interested in it since he simply wanted to continue with his happy and peaceful days next to his grandfather. Upon hearing this, the old man tried to convince him by telling him that by doing so he could meet creatures of different species such as giants or aids in addition to knowing several kingdoms such as Britannia. However, despite his words, Percival continued to refuse. Hours later while they were having dinner, the old man told him that in fact his father had not even waited to turn 16 to explore the world. Although when the protagonist asked him how he had lost his life, the old man preferred to avoid the subject and told him that he had belonged to a kind of order of knights who used to protect people. But well, one time they went to sleep they revealed to us that in reality Percival did want to explore the world and have adventures so much that he couldn't stand the excitement and spent the whole night celebrating. However, the reason why he hid his feelings was because he didn't want to abandon the family. The only person he had left in the world. However, the next day when he woke up after falling asleep in Hafez de la Isla, he realized that a presence was approaching the place. It was this guy here. A kind of gentleman who after arriving he explained to the boy that he was Iron Sight, a kind of holy knight, and he was looking for an old friend who apparently had belonged to the same organization of knights as him. So he asked him if he knew someone named Bargus, words that impressed Percival, who answered yes. In fact, it was his grandfather and right now he was preparing breakfast and after giving him his location, the protagonist took the opportunity to take a look at the guy's ship since he had never seen anything like that. However, while he was doing it, he had a feeling of danger quite strange, so without thinking he decided to return to his grandfather. Meanwhile, the latter was approached by the knight who asked him why the hell he was now using his sacred weapon simply to cook. After these words both exchanged powerful attacks and the knight took the opportunity to ask him why. That he had deserted from the order, to which the old man responded that it had been them who betrayed him. After this, both continued the fight, but the difference in power was too great, so much so that in seconds the guy caused serious damage to the old man. Meanwhile, Percival, who had witnessed everything, wanted to help by trying to land a few blows, but his attempts were of little use. He even ended up receiving a fatal attack at the hands of the knight, and although he continues to fight against him trying to endure the wounds, the situation did not change and the guy left him. Out of combat that he did explain to both of them that it was not personal, he had done that simply because recently, thanks to a prophecy, they had learned that 4 knights who would be known as the Horsemen of the Apocalypse would end their king, so he had to eliminate all the possible candidates. However, he did not realize that Percival, despite the serious injuries he had received, managed to get up to say goodbye to his grandfather, who did not have the same luck and was about to hang up his tennis shoes. Percival apologized for not having been able to do anything to protect him, but the old man told him not to worry. It had not been his fault, and in fact he thanked him for having remained by his side during the last years of an old man like him, asking him to continue with his journey. Not immediately before leaving, he revealed something shocking to the man. It seems that the gentleman from before was his father. Although due to his injuries he was not able to give him more details. After this the protagonist managed to bury him. He spent several days mourning completely alone, doing what he went out to do with the old man or that until he found the gift that the latter had left him for his birthday, motivating him to undertake his own adventure. So motivated by this and with a mission of taking revenge for what had happened, Pervil began his trip away from the island. It did take him several days to leave the latter since it was a fairly high mountain. But before continuing, they explained to us that the place we had arrived at was a kingdom that a few years ago had been on the verge of disappearing due to a war that took place between deities like gods and demons, battle that fortunately was stopped by 7 legendary warriors that many of you already know, the 7 deadly sins. But now let's focus on Percival, who after days descending from the mountain where he used to live ran into this species of fox with which he tried to communicate and ask him where he was since the boy had spent his entire life isolated. He did not know which creatures could communicate and which ones could not. However, after a while chasing the same fox, he ended up running into a type of circus performers who were practicing for their show, and which, by the way, had several types of magic, although not very powerful, but which was enough to leave Percival shocked, who quickly appeared before her and wanted to better witness her act. However, Doni, the most astute of the group, used his magic of levitation in order to take advantage and steal the protagonist's belongings, even though his companions tried to convince him not to do so. What they did not expect was that Percival easily got rid of his spell, and in seconds he ended up reaching it, thanks to his overwhelming strength. Of course, he naively believed that only they were playing with him, but after recovering his belongings, he took the opportunity to ask them if they knew a guy named Iron, and he explained to them that he was looking for him to carry out his revenge against the guy who eliminated his grandfather. Words that obviously shocked the circus performers who watching the situation he was in. They offered to take him to a nearby town where perhaps he could find information, and on the way they took the opportunity to tell him a little about their situation, about how the latter had become circus performers after failing to fulfill their dream of becoming holy knights, since their abilities, let's say, were not too powerful. Although while they were talking, they were approached by some villagers who were in search of a sacred knight because a wolf was attacking their town. Upon hearing this, Doni told them that that was not necessary, since they would take care of the problem on their own, telling their companions that this was the opportunity they were looking for. If they got rid of that beast, they could get some money. What they didn't count on was that when the wolf they were talking about arrived, it was a magical beast. Giant, with which they obviously would not have a chance, so the best thing was to escape. However, Percival did not agree and decided to stay to face the wolf, since that was what his grandfather had taught him. But things did not go well when Chico tried to fight in a different way than his. Fortunately, Doni was not that bad and ended up receiving an impact to protect him. After that, Percival stopped beating around the bush and was able to stop the beast with one hand, and just like he used to do on his island. A single attack was enough to remove the creature from the game. Obviously, both the Polinos and the circuses were shocked by the strength of that child. After this, all the people saw him as a hero. Although while Doni's wounds were being treated, the latter took the opportunity to drink a bath with Elba, the girl from before who, believing that the protagonist was just a child, did not mind sharing the bathroom. She was shocked to see the scars that had not yet completely healed on the Percival's body. In addition, they took advantage of the time to become quite close. Of course, the girl was left cold after finding out that the boy with whom she had shared a bathroom was the same age. On the other hand, the Poinos had organized a kind of celebration in honor of the hero who had saved their town, a celebration that Percival took advantage of. To ask if they knew a guy called Ironsight, but their efforts were in vain. Oh well, that was until this gentleman showed up, who was apparently the master of the wolf from before and was interested in a person who had been able to defeat him, telling him that he knew the whereabouts of the person he was looking for, but he would only tell him if he was able to defeat him, but otherwise he would take him with him by force. One of the protagonist's new friends wanted to help him, but his efforts were of no use. The guy was a true gentleman. Sacred. So after that, both of them started a 1 versus 1 combat in which the protagonist simply attacked him using his brute force method that was not giving him very good results because of the difference in power that existed between them, so much that the knight then, to subdue him, he decided to beat him until he surrendered in order to take him with him. All the Poinos were terrified by the beating that Perval was receiving until, motivated by the latter's bases, the boy was able to free himself from the knight, which he had done using first time his magic, although obviously he didn't even know how the hell that power worked, but he planned to use it to defeat the guy in front of him. And well, after obtaining his new ability, they both continued with the confrontation, but while trying to control it, he was able to send the knight flying, who didn't. It was explained what kind of magic he was using on that boy, yet he decided to leave aside the detours and continued with the confrontation using his own fire magic, with which he not only regained control of the battle but even put Perval on the ropes. That although he dodged a few attacks after being trapped by one of them, he could not free himself, receiving quite serious damage. Luckily, he awakened a new characteristic of his magic with which he was able to create a kind of mini mana clones, and not just that, his magic also allowed him to heal the wounds he had suffered until now. Upon noticing this, the knight understood less and less what kind of magic he provided, but of one thing he was sure, that this boy could be very valuable and he would not let him go for anything. However, when finally it seemed that the protagonist was taking control of the battle, Doni decided to interfere, and using his magic created a small opportunity for the plot to escape, telling him that he had no chance against that monster that had not even used all its power. However, it was too late. The guy managed to free himself with a powerful magical discharge and, tired of so many detours, he took the boy with him. Luckily, at that moment the fox himself was present and, using a kind of magical orb, was in charge of transporting both the protagonist and Doni to a place. Minutes later, the boys noticed that they were now several kilometers from the town from before, but that was not surprising. What was surprising was that the fox was able to communicate with them, and after introducing himself as Shin, he explained to them that his mission was to find the protagonist. Before he was captured by the knights from before, who incidentally belonged to an organization of dark knights that served the King of Britain. Arthur Queen had sent us to capture any individual who could become a horseman of the apocalypse warriors, who according to the prophecy would be the ones they would end, said King. Among them the Hunger Knight, the Plague, the War, and finally the Hunger. And according to the fox, our protagonist, he was one of them. Obviously Perval was not very convinced of it, since he had no interest in defeating the king and even less in representing death. Meanwhile, the knights from before were holding a kind of meeting which was taking place to give them some characteristics of the people they had to find in order to facilitate their search. By the way, at said meeting they ended up meeting Iron Sid and the knight from before, but well after the characteristics of the Iron Sight riders were revealed to them, he was shocked, because after that he was sure that his son was one of them. While the other guy now understood why the boy from before, he had so much power, awakening his interest in him even more, to the point that he confronted Iron Sight and asked him why, now that he knew that his son was a rider, he didn't take the opportunity to train him and get him on his side despite Ironsight's sole objective. It was to end his life, but well, returning with Perval, he was still trying to assimilate the news that the fox had given him. After informing him of this, he explained that he should now accompany him to the King of Leones, since in that place he could be safe and develop better his abilities. However, Percy Bideny was not very convinced of this, since they still doubted the veracity of his words. Although in the end the boy was convinced after hearing that the fox had information about Iron Sight, while Doni, who did not want to leave him alone, decided to accompany him, since he knew that his companions would be fine without him. So the three began their journey to their next destination, the Kingdom of Lions. That said, the trip would be quite long, and while they were carrying it out they decided to divide up to get some food from the protagonist. He ended up arriving at a kind of quite dark forest where some fairies noticed his presence, while Don and the fox, while looking for food, ran into this giant who seemed quite friendly. The bad thing was that minutes later the Sadas from before appeared to inform him that a boy had entered the cursed forest where, according to the giant, several dangerous monsters lived. So they had to get him out of there quickly. On his part, Perval was not taking any trouble getting rid of the beasts that the Otis were talking about, and he even had planned experiments. But well, The Alrub's friends, after learning of his capture, immediately set off accompanied by the fairies and the giantess to try to recover him. Meanwhile, the latter, after a while, woke up tied to a chair without his clothes and the type from before. He explained that he had removed them since the strong magic embedded in them prevented him from carrying out his experiments. But after explaining this, he told him that he would test some of his potions on his body, and if he was able to resist them he could leave, and after receiving several of them, Pervil's body, which luckily was quite strong, managed to assimilate them with slight changes. Either way, while Pervil was doing it, he realized that the guy was not as bad as he thought, and after a while he told him that the time had come for him to die. Last test, that said, the chances of him surviving were quite low. Meanwhile, the protagonist's friends were still crossing the hundreds of beasts that had control of the forest. So they would not be able to arrive in time. Luckily, that would not be necessary because Pervil easily broke the ropes on his own, something that he had not done all this time because he wanted to listen to what he had to say, and after recovering his clothes he began an exchange of attacks with the scientist, who also had the ability to use magic, but he was not at the level of Pervil in terms of strength. However, after the protagonist found out that the boy was actually creating that potion to heal the forest and not to destroy it, he decided to trust his words and ingest the potion, which immediately caused enormous pain in the body of the latter. Although a second later he stood up as if with nothing, and in fact now had much more energy than before. In other words, the experiment had been a complete success on his part. The scientist could not believe that the protagonist had trusted so easily. Moments later, he also ingested a portion of the sema to finish verifying his success. After that, the protagonist's friends were present after crossing the forest, although they did not understand how the protagonist had freed himself, and even more so how he had left unconscious the other boy, who while he was sleeping ended up saying the name of Hordo, a healer who used to live in that forest and whom in fact the fairies used to admire for the way he treated them. He even healed their wounds, explaining to us how this guy got to this place in search for ingredients for medicines, a place where he settled, and with the passage of time he found a giant and nines whom his parents had abandoned. So the latter made the decision to adopt him. However, a few months ago he had disappeared without a trace. And since then Nines' attitude had changed completely, starting to carry out experiments with the inhabitants of the forest. But once he woke up, he quickly wanted to use the potion he had created in the forest when he noticed that it continued to be deteriorated by a kind of poisonous mist. However, the fairies wanted to stop him, believing that he only wanted to continue damaging the creatures that lived in him. Luckily, Pervil stopped his attacks and asked them to trust the boy since he only wanted to help. After this, he quickly used his magical ability that allowed the potions to be recreated after ingesting them, and with which, after spreading it throughout all the areas damaged by the poison, he managed to restore the vitality that had always characterized the forest. After this, he apologized to Asadas for having used them as guinea pigs to carry out his experiments, explaining to them that he had done it because that was the only way to heal the forest, but now that his potion had been successful everything would return to normal. Of course, they owed all of this to Pervil, who risked himself for them. Obviously now everyone saw the Rider of the Apocalypse as a hero. However, things did not end there, since from the crack where the poison had been emerging from before emerges a quite terrifying creature who apparently was Ozian's grandfather, who had been transformed into that monster by some type of dark magic. Quickly the boy wanted to approach his grandfather. But fortunately, he was stopped by the Gigante, since the guy did not understand reasons and in fact continued to release the same poisonous gas, again affecting a large part of the Asian forest, who did not understand what the hell was happening. He tried to talk to it was a serious mistake because of this the giant received quite serious damage while trying to protect him, and for her Percival part, thanks to a quick movement, she managed to save her life. After this, a lady from before, or rather the relative of a knight, was present, revealing to her that he had transformed Hordo into that beast to destroy the forest, words that made Percival enforcer, who, changing his personality, promised his friend that he would return his grandfather to normal. Luckily, once he entered that state, his abilities completely changed so much that in a second, unfortunately, things did not end there, since seconds later, another knight was present under the orders of King Arthur, Talisker, the person responsible for Ordo's transformation, who, playing with them, told them that they would be able to defeat him. Normality to the old man, angry at his words, he prepared to face him. Unfortunately, the difference in power was abysmal, so he was about to be annihilated. Luckily, again, the protagonist acted quickly and managed to save his life. However, things were just beginning since the horde took them by surprise. He sent his grandson flying and left Pervel no choice but to stop his blows with his own body, since he had no other way to stop him without damaging him. Of course, his ions little by little began to bring back the old horde. But when the knight he noticed this and wanted to get rid of him to avoid problems. However, his plan was stopped by Pervel, who again used his body to stop his magic. Of course, by doing so he received quite serious troubles, but at least he was keeping his promise. On the other hand, when the furious knight he set out to kill them all and released the same intense burst of magic from before, with which, like the previous time, he managed to completely heal his wounds, and not only that, he even stopped the knight's intense ice attacks, the same attacks he used to return it to him. With more intensity, the boy was very broken. The knight did not understand how the hell a child had so much magical power. On his part, Percival did not stop and continued using his aura to subdue him, and after several attacks he forced him to confess why he had transformed the boy in that way. A person like a horde, to which the guy simply replied that by orders of his king, since he did not like people helping creatures of a race other than humans, and since the guy ignored all the warnings that had been given to him, given that they simply gave him an adequate punishment, turning him into the creature he was now. Words they wanted to enforce Pervel even more. However, the Son of Fruit took advantage of a small distraction to invoke an attack even more powerful than the previous one. What he did not count on was that he would Percival again. He used his magic to assimilate his attack and use it against him. After this act, the guy finally realized that this boy was one of the 4 horsemen that their king had ordered them to eliminate. So that was the perfect opportunity to fulfill his mission. So after assimilating it, he prepared to launch his maximum attack that he was sure the protagonist could not contain. Luckily, the fox realized this and quickly advised the protagonist to use his magic to create a weapon and counterattack. So the latter, remembering the sword that his grandfather used to bring, he used his power to recreate it, being able to not only stop the knight's attack but even demand a better life for him with just one of his impacts. The boy had been able to get rid of a holy knight on his own. Obviously everyone they were shocked by her power. Of course, the boy still didn't even know how to deactivate his magic. By the way, the giantess had apparently managed to avoid a fatal blow by turning her skin into metal at the right moment. So now her life was not in danger, unfortunately, no. Everything was good, since Hordo still continued to become a monster despite the death of the knight. Luckily, the fox, after searching the place, managed to find the cursed object that the knight had used to transform him. So after destroying it, the old man finally returned. Normality like that. I couldn't believe it. Thanks to the protagonist, both the forest and his grandfather had been saved. But well, after witnessing the moving dinner, the protagonist decided to continue with their trip. Before doing so, the fox explained to them that King Arthur had given him canes. Like before, to all his knights, so now Pervel's goal was not only to face his father but also the blessed King Arthur, although before that they had to continue their journey to the Kingdom of Loans, but they did not expect that before leaving they were hit by Rent, who explained to them that he wanted to accompany them on their trip in order to repay them for all the help they had given him. At first, the protagonists were not very convinced. But in the end they accepted, since their medical skills could be useful. By the way, Ozian's friends, they were happy that the boy had a new objective. So the 4 again set out on the trip. Days later, they show us how the protagonists had visited various places on their trip to Loans, and in fact, now Pervel was beginning to manage his magic better and better. In addition, he had begun to use the kitchen knife that his grandfather used to carry, which by the way was a sacred sword, and the fox, after noticing it, asked the boy why a weapon like that had the power, to which the protagonist he simply explained that his grandfather had also been a holy knight, but he didn't know much about his history, but well. After continuing with their trip, they finally reached a city, after days of walking aimlessly, the city of Seaston, where they finally found themselves. They could rest a little. On the other hand, they show us how Iron Sight was also in that same city. In fact, he had met with one of its leaders to ask him to help him find some objects of great value. Yes, the daughter of the guy who, by the way, he had a strange type of magic. He noticed that the knight was not someone to trust. Meanwhile, Percival, who was exploring the place a little, ended up finding a kind of quite old piece, a piece that he did not have much time to examine since the same girl from before she ended up finding it and quickly ordered him to give her that piece in a rather abrupt manner, even starting an altercation with Percival's colleagues. Of course, she did so believing that they worked for Ironside, and for no reason did she want the artifact to fall into her hands, although she was shocked when she saw that the protagonist gave him the object without opposing existence since he was not even interested in it. In addition to that, he realized that he was not trying to deceive her when he noticed with his magic that Percival was not lying. In fact, it was the first time he had seen a soul so pure. So after checking it, he returned the object and told him to hide it for a while, but that under no circumstances would he give it to Iron Sight, words that left Percival cold. Now that he knew that his father was there, he was eager to find it. No. However, the fox made him see reason by telling him that at that moment the most important thing was to find out why Iron Sight was behind that artifact, and with the level of power he currently had, he had little chance against a rival like Iron Sight. So he did it. It was better to plan properly what their next steps would be. On the other hand, they show us how the girl from before did not agree that her father would accept to work for Ironsight since she knew that this alliance would not bring anything good to her city. Unfortunately, her words were of no use. You're welcome. His father was a due for the power he could obtain working for the knight. Hours later, Ironside organized a meeting among the townspeople to help him locate the missing piece to complete a fairly ancient artifact. By the way, the protagonists were in the surroundings to listen to what the guy had to say. Meanwhile, the guy made the foxes believe that they needed that piece to stop the evil that was about to hit their kingdom, although in reality it was quite the opposite, since the fox realized that this artifact was the same one that years ago had been created by the race of goddesses to keep the demonic race sealed. Therefore, they had to prevent the artifact from being completed at all costs, otherwise chaos would be unleashed. Furthermore, the fox revealed to him that if it was completed, Irons would use the souls of the Polynos as a sacrifice to activate his ritual. Luckily, they had the last piece. So the best thing according to the fox was to leave that place and leave the city as soon as possible, and even though Percival was eager to face his father, in the end he ended up understanding that now he had no other alternative but to escape. By the way, while this was happening, the girl from before decided to confront the knight, telling everyone that his words were false since, thanks to his power, she realized that all this time she had been deceiving them. Her father wanted to get her into Z, but it was too late. Ironside planned to punish her for her words. Meanwhile, the protagonist planned to use the distraction to escape, or well, all of them except for Percival, who without thinking about it, he rushed at his father, although not to confront him, rather to escape, taking the girl with him. Luckily, his plan worked because thanks to taking them by surprise, he managed to escape. The bad thing was that as soon as he and his friends arrived in the city, they realized that his fragment had been stolen and was now in the hands of Ironside, the worst possible scenario. Luckily, the fox told them that they had a chance since the knight would need to kill several people to complete the ritual, so they had to hurry to take the -1 piece. That was a mission with a high degree of danger. However, the protagonist did not think twice and was ready to face his father, so a battle between two sides was about to begin. Meanwhile, Fruit's son had begun with the invocation ritual. Unfortunately, this summary ends here, in which, by the way, we cover the first 6 chapters. So if you want us to release a second one as soon as the next chapters are broadcast, this video must reach 10 comments and 10,000 views. Now take a break.